So that was the kind of stuff they don't prepare you for in seminary, and also the kind of stuff you didn't go into seminary for. This is more the stuff that we gather together to pray and to discuss some really great stuff about our faith and to share our own journeys wherever we might be in this call that the church has for us to evangelize, in season and out of season. St. Paul says all the time we are called to evangelize. So let's start off with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Almighty and ever-loving God, you call us to be members of the new evangelization, to spread the faith to all that we meet, not only in the traditional ways, but new and exciting ways that will attract and grab people, capture not only their hearts, but their minds as well, their imaginations, and make their souls truly flutter. We ask that you might send that grace, that Holy Spirit upon us today as we discuss how we can best announce the gospel of the Lord, into a world that does not always have open ears to hear it and open hearts to receive it. Lord, help us to receive your word ourselves, as we are constantly in need of evangelization and conversion ourselves. Give me some guidance, some good words, and help us in our discussions and questions to grow deeper in our faith. For we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Never been accused of being a soft speaker, but if you can't hear me, just let me know. I'm using the microphone, and I probably get animated a couple times during our talk. But the name of the talk that actually Peggy came up with, it is a great one, Announce the Gospel of the Lord. And you know that actually the reason why she chose it actually comes from one of our new translations that we have for the end of Mass. You remember all the different endings how it used to be before the new translation, go in peace to love and serve the Lord and each other and all those other things. We're down to really three. Go forth, the Mass is ended. Proclaim the gospel with your lives, or the one that we've chosen for kind of the title of our presentation today, which is Announce the Gospel of the Lord. Go and announce the gospel of the Lord. Pope Paul VI had a document called Evangelium Nuncianti, which means basically announce the gospel. All right, and you know, of course, where evangelization comes from. Evangelium is the gospel, the good news. And so when we are called to go out and spread the good news, to announce the gospel, what we're asking you to do is to evangelize. And in this document, Evangelium Nuncianti, that Paul VI wrote, he said, very powerfully, it's in section 14, he said, the church exists to evangelize. The church exists to evangelize. That is why the church exists, to spread the good news, to go and announce the gospel. That is our ultimate purpose here on life as Christians and as the church itself, as Paul VI said. Now, that's the mission that we have from God. But how do we then translate that into a culture and in a society today that doesn't want to hear it? And this becomes the crux of what we'd like to talk about today, is how are we called to announce the gospel of the Lord in our new liturgy at the end of Mass, when you're sent out the church doors, as ESPN says, when someone strikes out at home plate, says you don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here, and you're going sent. You're sent out. You're going out into the world to announce the gospel of the Lord. But you're going out into a world that does not want to hear about the gospel for lots of different reasons. And we're going to kind of break out the talk into two different ways. Why do we find ourselves in this conundrum of called to announce the gospel of the Lord? The church exists to give witness to Jesus, and yet we find ourselves in a culture and a society that doesn't want to hear it any longer. And so, how did that happen? Why do we find ourselves where we are now? And then the second part is how? How do we're not going to give up our hands and say, oh, well, it's tough, so I guess we'll just give up, and we're not going to announce the gospel of the Lord anymore. We're just going to sit on our hands and be quiet and not do anything. And no, that's not an option. So we're taking that option off the board. We still have to announce the gospel of the Lord. How are we going to go about doing it? And not just how, but how are we going to do it effectively to really reach people's hearts? How are we going to do it in a way that's actually going to make a difference? You can go around and announce the gospel of the Lord and feel like, hey, I did my job because I went and I said, hey, do you know Jesus? And they said no, and I said, fine, I'm done my job today, and walk away. Or is there a better way in which we might be able to do that? So let's start talking about, and also, John Paul II has called us to a new evangelization, which is basically, again, the heart of the question. He saw this contradiction between our main mission to evangelize and people that don't want to hear it anymore. So how do we do this? We got to do a new evangelization, something different than we've done before. In fact, this year, very soon, is going to be proclaimed the Year of Faith. And how John Paul II is going to kick off that Year of Faith is with a synod all about what? The new evangelization. So it's really cool. This is something that obviously is weighing heavily on the church's mind. It's something very important. If the church exists to evangelize and is causing all these problems on how to evangelize, then this is probably the most central topic that we could be talking about and discussing as not just Catholics. Maybe some of us might not be Catholics, but as Christians, as people who love Jesus. So how do we go about doing it? First, let's start off with why do we find ourselves in this situation? Archbishop Dolan of New York was my rector, Monsignor Dolan then, and now he's named a new cardinal of the church, which is really exciting. He constantly picked on me all my time in seminary. I'm still look so young and act so immature, all those kind of things. But no, he led me to be constantly picked on. So we became very good friends. In fact, when I went up to his installation as the Archbishop of New York, I didn't belong there, but he took me up to like the 13th floor of this some kind of like insurance building. I don't know what it was, but it was really fancy. And you could see and look over all these different parts of New York City. It's right in the heart of Manhattan. And there's the only people in there were millionaires and like cardinals. And here I come walking up into this room, and he sees me from across the hall. Now, I don't know if you know Archbishop Dolan, but he's very gregarious. If you listen to Catholic radio, you hear him a lot of times. He has his own show and stuff like that. He actually dropped by the Today Show on the day that he was announced a cardinal and sat down with Matt Lauer and Al Roker and just joking around with him. He's that kind of guy. So he sees me across the room, and everywhere he goes, someone's shaking in his hand and he's taking a picture with him or whatever, and he shouts across the room. He says, "Matt, Matt!" And that's how he kind of talks a little bit. "Get over here! I want to look skinny in some of these pictures. Stand next to me!" I said, "Oh man, nothing changes. You can dress him up, but he's still the same." So anyway, what I'm trying to build up to is the fact that he was a teacher for us in one class. He got to teach one class because he's also a very good church historian, and especially American church history. And so he taught us overseas in Rome a great course on American church history. And I just want to start off with something like the kind of a historical perspective, a little bit that might help us to understand maybe some of the early seeds of where this kind of a reserved approach to evangelization and not really wanting to go out and talk about it from ourselves. Not that people weren't interested in hearing it at this time, but we weren't interested in really going out and talking about it too much. And that's because the colonies came from England, right? And here you had a group of Catholics. They're often called rescuant Catholics, something like that. Anyway, I can't pronounce the right word, but the Catholics that basically refused the penal laws of Catholicism back in England. And these were Catholics who had some very important characteristics, one of which they were very devout, but they were also very private. You weren't allowed to share your faith. You weren't allowed to worship publicly and do all these other things. So they loved their faith, but they kept it inside very deeply. And they also were constantly trying to show that we are loyal citizens. Just because we're Catholic doesn't mean that we are not necessarily miscreants and disloyal traitors and all the other things that they were painted as. So this group that was heavily persecuted in England came over to Maryland and received this grant to make Maryland into a place where there was religious freedom. And when they came over here to celebrate their religious freedoms, they didn't go out saying, "Hey, look at me, I'm Catholic, look at this." They actually kept that same traditions and characteristics that they lived for so many years very fervently in England, and they brought that here to them. And they basically huddled into their homes. In fact, you can go over to DeRagan Manor, which is where Charles Carroll lived, not too far from here. You can see his little home chapel. Well, you can't really right now because it's not public and you'll get shot at, but I went there once and it's really interesting. Got his home chapel. This is the place where Charles Carroll and John Carroll, the first bishop, a lot of the presidents would go. But it was very private. Very, very, very private, and they would not want to go out and make a big deal of the fact that they were Catholic because they were basically taught through history and through the way that they lived their lives that was not the big thing. It's a private thing for me, and believe it deeply, like Charles Carroll and John Carroll and many of the early Catholics in America did, but they didn't go around spreading it too much. Because of fear, because of worrying about what that would look like for others, and also to not be persecuted. They were devoutly Americans. They were very patriotic. They loved America, and they wanted to make sure that people didn't think of them as beholden to a foreign king called the Pope in Rome. But rather they were Americans who happened to be Catholic and loved their faith, but you know what? It's not going to enter into my political life. It's not going to be entered into, I'm not going to wear it on my sleeve kind of thing. And Archbishop Dolan used to call this Maryland-style Catholicism. And I think it exists around still a lot today, is that a lot of us are very devoutly Catholic, but we don't want to wear it on our sleeves for lots of different reasons. And I think I'll go into some of more of the more real reasons why today we struggle with a culture that doesn't want to hear the gospel. But I just wanted to kind of let you know about that. It's one of my thoughts that I definitely think that there is still a remnant or a residual effect of how European Catholics lived out their faith here in the new land that harkens back to their experience in Europe, which was very much persecuted and saying, hey, you can live your faith, but don't tell me about it, and just keep it quiet. Live it in your home, but don't bring it out into the public sphere, especially a public sphere that is dominated by, a Protestant culture and things like that didn't want to and were very scared about the unknowns and the fears that come about with, which is anti-Catholicism in many ways. So that's kind of the first kind of little just point that I wanted to make about the Maryland-style Catholicism that still exists today and certainly existed back in the days in which our colonies were being founded. The second thing that there is a rise in is aggressive people who don't want to hear about the faith. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this because I don't think it's really that big of a threat. There are a rise of a few people, evangelical atheists, you might want to call them. People that are aggressive in saying, not only do I not want to hear about the faith, but I don't want you to say it to anybody. In fact, I want to quiet you down. I want to shut you down. I want to stop you from speaking. Now, part of the reason why we shouldn't spend a lot of time on these guys is, one, because they're idiots. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, if you read things like the God Delusion, other things, I mean, it's so nonsensical and doesn't carry the force that a lot of people who want to read it and make it say what they think it's going to say. It doesn't. If you look at it logically and you look at the different answers and things that have been around for thousands of years that are totally ignored by all of these so-called evangelical atheists, and they all talk in British accents, which gives them a huge advantage over anything that we say because it just naturally makes you look smart. What is it, Revis guy or whatever was talking, at the Golden Globes the other day. I mean, he sounds smart even when he's saying some really gross stuff, and it's like, that's very interesting. And you're like, he's saying crazy stuff. And the other thing, the other reason why I don't really want to dwell too heavily on these evangelical atheists is another two reasons. One, they don't make any sense. They're really idiotic in many of their arguments that have been answered many times, but they refuse to be really kind of addressed in a serious way. The second is they don't offer any alternative answer. So it's not like they're trying to replace something with something. And when that's confronted, when you say, well, okay, what do we do? If you went out, if you're evangelical atheist, you want to replace my faith with something, what is it? It's nothingness. It's almost like an attack just to break things down, but there's nothing that's really going to be put in its place to motivate and encourage people to follow what they're going after. And that's what the heart of it is nothingness. It's like the Indiana Jones movie, where the first one, it's really cool, where he's going in, he's got to take the idol off the altar, and he snatches it off, and he has to put the bag of sand back on. That's kind of the same thing. It's like they're exchanging a bag of sand that really doesn't have any value. And you can tear away the faith and try to take all kinds of false caricatures of it and do all kinds of things. But if you're not going to give me something that's going to make more sense to me and help motivate and inspire me to live my life better and to make me into a better person, then ultimately it's all going to just sink into sand and be nothingness, and I'm going to find the false idol that you're trying to put there, and it's going to cause that big ball to roll down, and I'll run away, and they'll be shooting arrows at me, and all. It's a great movie. You should go check it out. Is that the second one? I thought it was the first one. It's a good one, nevertheless. So, The third reason is, I think the evil one has realized that frontal approaches against faith do not work. You know, there was a time before the crucifixion when this kind of bloodthirsty desire to say, let's put a stomp on this stuff. Let's take Christianity and smash it out and be aggressive against it. And let's do that. That was like kind of the approach of the evil one for a long time. And I think they very quickly found out that that does not work. That is what caused Christ to die and save our souls. It's what caused the church to spread through the blood of the martyrs throughout the whole world. That's what caused the conversion of all of the world around us. And so this full frontal attack on Christianity does not work. There needs to be a much more insidious and powerful way in which we can kind of quiet down the church. And that happens not through a direct, aggressive assault and persecution, but rather it becomes in a very, very serious and difficult way, which I'm about ready to mention. Let me see, I just want to make sure I get all my notes here. All right. So the way in which now our faith is quieted, the way in which that we find it difficult to evangelize is not so much through a direct attack. Like I said, I don't think that's really the big thing that we want to focus on today. But it's rather at the indirect approach. It's at the insidious tactic or way in which we start to think about religion as not important. Where all of a sudden it doesn't have any more value. Where it does not any longer really even come up on the screen as worthy of debating or talking about. And that is what Cardinal Newman calls liberalism. And I wanted to just read this to you real quickly. This came from 1879. And just like Archbishop Dolan, Cardinal Newman, John Henry Newman was just named a cardinal. And when you be named a cardinal, you give like a little speech, you know, and it's kind of saying, this is what my whole purpose is, this is why I'm really excited to be a cardinal. And he wrote this. I think it really does a good job of defining what I mean liberalism, because you don't want to think of politics right now, right? We're not talking about liberal, conservative kind of things like that. Liberalism is a different kind of philosophy and theological ideal that Newman spent his whole way fighting against. And he defines it very clearly here. He says, for 30, 40, or 50 years, I have resisted to the best of my powers the spirit of liberalism in religion. Never did Holy Church need champions against it more solely than now, when alas, it is an error overspreading as a snare the whole earth. And on this great occasion, when it is natural for one who took my place, say blah, blah, he goes on to say how awesome he is. Alright, then he says this, liberalism in religion is the doctrine that there is no positive truth in religion, but that one creed is as good as another. And this is the teaching which is gaining substance and force daily. It is inconsistent with any recognition of any religion as true. It teaches that all are to be tolerated, for all are matters of opinion. Revealed religion is not truth, but a sentiment and a taste, not an objective fact, not miraculous, and it is the right of each individual to make it say just what strikes his fancy. Devotion is not necessarily founded on faith. Men may go to Protestant churches or to Catholic. They may get good from both and belong to neither. They may fraternize together in spiritual thoughts and feelings without having any views of any doctrines in common or seeing the need of them. Since then religion is so personal a peculiarity and so private a possession, we must necessarily ignore it in the intercourse of man with man. If a man puts a new religion every morning, what is that to you? It is an imperative to think about a man's religion as about his sources of income or the management of his family. Religion is in no sense the bond of society. So what he basically is saying is that this concept of liberalism, which he saw in 1879, and we're still, I think, waking up to the realization of it, he saw it already kind of taken over back then, and what I think we are seeing right now is really the kind of explosion of this ideal is that religion is really not have truth behind it. It's what kind of beer you like. It's at that level. It's what makes you feel good. It's how you dress in the morning, or what's your favorite type of music. And whether you change that or not, or whether you do that, you can't be judged or kind of see that there's any truth in the fact that I like resurrection beer, or you like this kind of beer. Or I like coffee, and you don't put cream in your coffee. I can't believe you don't put cream in your coffee. That's the worst thing that you could ever do. It's as silly to argue about that, liberalism says, is as silly as it is to argue or even discuss and talk about matters of faith. Because all it is just a private meeting between you and God, and there's so many different ways in which this can happen that there is no firm truth or substance behind the ideal of religion. The way I like to put it is this, is that it sucks the truth out of religion, your foundation is gone, and what you're left with is the equivalent of silly putty. Alright? Liberalism makes religion into silly putty. First of all, it's very silly to discuss things that really don't have truth or substance behind them. If you were trying to, again, kind of using that coffee example, or saying, if you're going to argue about something that is as trivial as how you prefer your coffee and how I prefer my coffee, that is silly. And it doesn't really have any really bearing on the rest of us. So why don't you just enjoy your coffee the way you do, and I'll enjoy the coffee I like my way, and just leave me alone about it. Why do you bother me about it? It's silly. It's also moldable and changeable how you want it. So you don't like that ideal that's in religion? Well, have you looked in Buddhism, and have you looked over in Confucianism, and have you looked at these kind of things? And you can just mix and match these things. I don't like Christ's beard, so I'm going to just replace him with Buddha, because he looks a little bit more like me. And I'm going to have him and he's going to say, you know what? This is my religion. This is what I like, and you can't tell me that I'm wrong or that I'm right, just like you can't tell me how to drink my coffee. It becomes silly putty. One of the coolest things about silly putty that you and I used to do, I'm sure, is you take it out and you smush it onto the comics, and you pull it out, and look, there's the image of that comic. You're making a religion in your image. You're taking out the truth and making it very flexible and foldable and really nice, and then you are making your own imprint of it and saying, look, this is my religion. It's silly to you guys because it's my own. And that's okay in according to liberalism. It's also like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. You can't really kind of make any arguments about it because it's always shifting and changing. And you can mold it tomorrow and change it differently however you view it. And this ideal behind religion and liberalism is basically, another way to look at it, is ripping out the backbone. If you don't have a backbone, you don't stand for anything. You're just flopping around like a dead fish. You don't have any kind of thing to stand on. You can't stand up like a man or a woman and say, this is what I believe. I've got a backbone. I believe in something. Alright? I can't say that if everyone around me thinks that what I believe is the equivalent of what type of beer or wine I drink. That you don't have a backbone for those kind of things. But you do have a backbone for something that means everything to you. You do have a backbone for something that is truth. And that is where the biggest crux of an attack of liberalism is in regards to religion. Is that, are we going to kind of say, look, there is really no truth behind what is being presented. And if that happens, if that kind of ideal wins over society, then it becomes not worth certainly announcing the gospel, and it's not worth really even talking about in polite conversation. It's kind of like you don't bring up politics. Already you hear all the time, don't bring up religion, right? Why? Because your opinion might offend mine, or what you say might make me upset. And we'll go into why or how to combat that in a little bit, because there's a real problem with that. We don't want to go around offending people or making people upset. That does the opposite of what we want to do. But there is ways in which we can speak about the truth of religion that's going to reach all people. That is going to be the foundation that everyone is yearning for. And that's the thing that people still have not woken up to. Liberalism has done the Indiana Jones switch. And they've said, look, we're going to take truth out of religion, make it into whatever you want. And in doing so, they've made it into nothingness. And what we are left and what we have sold is nothingness. Again, evil cannot make you sin if they show you how ugly it is. Alright? And it's the same tactic. Evil cannot win you over to, hey, accept nothingness in place of something, unless it tries to find a way to make nothingness look attractive. And so to make nothingness look attractive, it pulls on this old kind of thing that, hey, everybody's going to be right about everything. And what does that mean? Nobody's right about nothing. And it just all falls apart. And that is the other consequence that we are experiencing in our world today as things fall apart around us. As people don't have a backbone and truth to stay firm on. Because everything's shifting around on their feet like Play-Doh or silly putty. And there's nothing to hold on to that's real and strong and lasting in this world. And everything is just saying, well, let's change it to this. Let's change it to that. What about ancient truths that have lasted for all of time and are now doubted and thrown away as so much garbage that have held on to the human race for thousands and thousands of years? We find ourselves in a situation today in which hope is desperately lacking. And people don't have something to grasp on, and they are drowning in the difficulties that life is presenting to them, and they don't have anything solid to grab onto, because everything solid that they try to grab onto is made into what you like it to be. And that will not hold you up. It will change. You will change it yourself. We all want to. I want to change to make it into whatever I want, because that's what I desire. But that's not going to be my help that I need. I tell people this story all the time, and it just strikes me as one of the hallmarks of what we are going through, or a symptom, a red flag of it. I was in a cigar shop not too long ago, and I was in there, and I came in there. A couple police officers came in, and I could tell they wanted to tell me something. And so I kind of stuck away from the side, and one of them came up to me, and he was just really, something was going on. And I said, hey, what's happening? And he said, Father, I've been a police officer for 25 years. He said, here in Howard County. And he said, my precinct used to get about 1 or 2 calls a month about someone who had attempted or did take their life. And he looked at me, and I thought he was going to cry. And he said, Father, not a single day goes by that I myself do not answer a call of someone who has attempted or taken his life in this county, in this precinct. So a whole precinct who's dealing with 1 or 2 a month is now dealing with every police officer. He had a partner there who came over because he knew what he was going to talk about and reiterated similar things. And this is a really sobering story that makes me realize that this is the fruit of replacing something with nothing. It causes people to swim and drown in what they're going through. So the other symptoms that this leads you to, liberalism and religion, you can't talk about it. We already said that. It's not polite conversation. Again, it's your religion or your politics. You could be a Democrat today and return to be a Republican tomorrow, or go the other way. And that's not going to make you less of a person. It's not. There's really no. Everyone's got good sides on both things. It's not something that you would often talk about. You can't let this influence or affect your life. If it's something that's unique just for you, and it's not really that ultimately that important, you can't really bring that out into the open and have it change your public opinion on things. This is what privately makes me feel good. But religion out in the public sphere then becomes something, well, how, and you hear this argument all the time, how are you going to put your religious beliefs on me as a politician? How are you going to kind of take what you believe to be true in religion, and that's fine, keep it inside your own house because that's good for you, but it's not necessarily good for all of us because it's not truth. Truth is good for everybody, whether it's in your house or whether it's outside. If it's not true, then it's just privately for you. Don't bring that out into the public sphere. So that's another fruit of liberalism, is don't let religion affect your life because it's just something privately just for you. Keep it to yourself and we'll be fine. But don't share it, all right? Don't bring it out here because I don't want to hear it. My religion is different than yours. Your truth is different than my truth. Which, by the way, is a logical inconsistency and can't happen, but nevertheless, your truth is different than my truth is the way that liberalism will kind of present it. The third symptom is, why should you share or evangelize your faith if it's not really that important? And I think we've already talked about that. There's 3 types of people that this leads to. One is very satisfied people. People whose faith is buried in other interests. And this is why I think we have seen an explosion of entertainment in our world today. We cannot escape from entertainment. It is something that is constantly, we need YouTube desperately. When NFL was going on strike, people would talk about suicides. I mean, we would have been in big trouble. People, they didn't know how to handle it. What if the NFL didn't happen? You know, I think if an alien race came down now, all they'd have to do is disconnect our internet and we would all die. I mean, it's just like, we need entertainment. It's like we cling to it. It's an obsession. An obsession with me too. It's this, and that's the ideal too, the satisfied people who aren't going to talk about these deep issues of why two different types of truth that are both truth can be the same. No one wants to ask that question because it's a deep kind of philosophical question. I'd rather watch the Golden Globes or Jersey Shore or something like that. And that is a sad reality of where we live today. And the society in which we live is this kind of buried faith, bury the most important things, the only things that really matter in the end, the only things that actually make a difference. We bury that under an avalanche of things to keep us distracted and entertained. And we can't escape from it. And it causes people to not worry about evangelization or to hear the gospel because, look, man, I'm doing fine. And they're really not doing fine. A lot of times their problems are masked over by, again, entertainment, pornography, drugs, alcohol, all kinds of things that we'll do to try to mask the difficulties and the angst that we're feeling in our hearts and in our minds because we don't have any way to really come to a truth to free us from it. So we bury it in lots of other things. We also have rootless people. We have a lot of people, and continuing new generations, that have no experience of Christ. They've heard of Him, of course, but they have no community. There's no meaningful sharing of their difficulties of life or their joys and happinesses besides Facebook or the internet and things like that. So we have a lot of people that don't know who Christ is. Not just, everyone knows Christ, who He is. This is why John Paul II said we need a new evangelization. The old evangelization would say, hey, let me introduce you to my friend Jesus. The new evangelization, here, why don't you come take a sit down here and let me talk to Jesus and let me actually get to know Him, because everybody knows His face, everybody knows who He is, but do we really know Him in our hearts? And there's a lot of rootless people that we also have a lot of people, I guess the right word would be guilty people, or people who look upon religion or equate religion with morality rules and laws. Again, this is their mind-based, it's really not true, but they feel fear, anxiety, shame, and guilt when Christians, and a lot of this is our fault, most of everything, it's a lot of our faults here. The way in which we evangelize, we don't want this stereotype to continue to exist, where people feel that Christians are all about condemning me and making me feel guilty and shameful, because you know what that's going to make me or anybody who experienced that to walk away. We don't want any part of that. That's not what's really going to change people's hearts and minds and evangelize them. And it's also not why Christ came. It's not what Christianity is about. And we'll get into that in a second. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. All right. So we've got Maryland-style Catholicism. We've got this kind of hidden private faith. We've got liberalism and its presentation of sucks the truth out of religion, which leads us with satisfied people, rootless people, and guilty people who all don't want anything to do and hear the message of the gospel. They do not want you to announce the gospel of the Lord. Right? Now we got to move into the how do we do it, because like I said, we can't quit. We can't give up. That's why we exist. And why you're breathing, why God keeps us alive, is so we can spread the message of the gospel. So how do we do it? But let me pause there and see if there's any kind of clarifications or questions and things like that before we dive into the how. Or maybe the how is a little bit shorter. We can just keep going, and then we'll have questions afterwards too. Anyone have any burning questions right now? All right. The how. How do you attract, and this is actually something I hope in the questions we can develop, because I like to get some reason how to do this too. We're all in this boat together. I brought a pen with me, I think. Oh, yes, I brought a pen with me, so I'm going to take notes. And you're going to teach me how to do this, because we all need to work together. How do you attract satisfied people? You attract satisfied people by attracting them. I don't think any longer that the answer to attract those who are satisfied, those who are just comfortable with life, and kind of how they don't want to rock the boat, and religion might rock my boat, so I'm just fine with my Xbox, I'm fine doing this, I've got a good job, I'm making enough money. Don't talk to me about religion because it's gonna might mess my mojo up. How do we do that? How do we evangelize them? I don't think the answer is to kind of talk about the evils of, or the bad things, because it's really not evil. Entertainment, all these other kind of things, money, those things, all these things are good things. But I don't think the answer, again, is to make anyone feel guilty or anything like that. I think the answer is to take the challenge, the more difficult path, which is always usually the right path, by the way. If you got two paths and one's pretty tough, usually that tough one is going to lead to something good. That tough path is to attract them. The tough path is for us as Christians, who I dare think are just as creative and as wonderfully smart and gifted as the rest of the world, to say, why don't we come up with things that will attract them, that will entertain them, and at the same time bring them to encounter Christ? You know, why do we not have such a place in things like Hollywood or movies and music and internet clips and all those other things where people constantly spend so much of their time? I think that new evangelization needs to be able to find ways in which we can present these truths, in really exciting, entertaining ways. And you know, the advantage we have is that what we're saying is really good. It's not just vapid stuff. It actually has some substance. It has meaning to it. It's really cool stuff that can transform people's lives. How can we not take that really awesome gift and not make it as exciting as the Jersey Shore? I do not understand that. How we cannot make our Christian faith as attractive and as beautiful, as exciting and as enrapturing as things that when you look at them objectively should make you throw up. So how does this happen? I mean, what do we got to do to make the faith attract people and make them really excited about the faith? That is how I think we need to attack the satisfied people. How we need to reach them is by attracting them, presenting them with a project, a product, thank you very much. A product that is as good as the other stuff. You go on YouTube and you look at the Christian stuff, it's crappy. You know, it's like put together by a 3-year-old on a Macintosh. You look at the atheist stuff, you're like, wow, that is cool. You know, and it's like, how does this work? You know, we need to embrace that part of the new evangelization. All right, restless people. How do we need to do that? This really revolves around giving people experience. And sometimes experience needs to begin in service. It's one of the things that I think is obviously the hallmark, and still when you mention Christianity, what is it? You know, it's about serving God, especially when you mention Jesus, and serving your neighbor and helping people out, and that is so important. And this is a doorway to get people to their hearts captured. People desperately want to serve. Remember, we are made good. We are made in the image and likeness of God. I mean, human beings are awesome people. And that just needs to be tapped into. And if you give someone an experience of serving their fellow men and women, if you give someone an opportunity to reach out and help somebody else, it can transform people's hearts. And they start to see that, again, there's something more to life than just this world in which we live. There's something supernatural. There's something amazing about us as human beings and what we can do and how we can help people. So I think that if we give people a true experience of service, it starts to connect them and grow those roots that they're able to say, you know, there's something to this. There's something to this Christ. The other thing too is to give people true experiences of prayer. All right. And this is not going out and teaching people how to pray the rosary. I love the rosary, believe me, I do. But I do not think that it is going to be our most powerful tool in evangelization to go out and give people a rosary who are just, you know, learning about Christ and say, all right, look, this is how we do it. We pray 50 Hail Marys. We do it, and they're like, wait a second, what are we doing? You know, how is this? You know, that will come, you know, if it's a true, and we need to have that come for sure. And again, I don't want to say anything bad about one of our greatest weapons as evangelizers to pray the rosary, but I do think that we need to give people authentic and true experiences of prayer, which is, again, that sit down with Jesus, that opportunity to meet a God who loves them more than they can imagine, a God who has become incarnate for them, a God who knows what it's like to be human, who goes through the experience of loss of friends, of death, of loved ones, of abandonment, and of happiness, and of joy and celebration. A God who is one of us, who counts the hairs on your head and wants to share every moment of life. This is a unique part of our religion and over all the other religions, is that God is not a distant God. that's waiting up in heaven saying, you can do it, I'm like your cheerleader. We now have a God that says, I am here with you, and I'm a shoulder for you to cry on. I want to walk hand in hand with you. There's a little footsteps prayer you can share. And this is real experience of prayer, where people connect to the divine and connect to something deeper in this world. And not by wanting something. That's another big thing. A lot of times I think we say, as Christians, like, prayer really revolves around, like, and a lot of people will come to me that I've never seen at church before or whatever, but they're having a difficult pregnancy, or they've got the diagnosis, and they come, pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. And that is definitely a good thing to do. But in Christianity, if we're wrapped up in the ideal that prayer equals something from God, like a quid pro quo, like Tim Tebow prays and he wins a game or something like that, that gets us in a lot of trouble. That's not real. I mean, prayer is do your will, God. I'm going to do your will. And to really kind of get people to experience prayer of abandonment, to say, God, I'm trusting in you. That first step of AA, which sets people on the right road every time. Like, there is a God, and He's better than me. He's awesome. And then He loves me, and cares for me, and wants to help me in my journey of life. So that's real prayer. It's not wanting something. It's not rote prayer. It's not, kind of asking for things. It's a deep, intimate relationship that you would have with a friend. Introducing them to their lover. Introducing to them the one who loves them infinitely more than anyone else could ever do. That's the true experience of prayer that rootless people need to see. Guilty people, how do we welcome them? We welcome them. Christianity is not a religion of rules. Just today we have this wonderful reading from 1 Samuel or the Gospel, that Jesus is talking about David. And King David's walking through the fields, and he's picking the grains of wheat, and he's eating the bread in the temple that only the priest should eat. And the Pharisees are like screaming at the disciples for going through a field and picking off the little heads of wheat and chomping on them, and they're going. And the Pharisees are like, oh my God, that's like a big sin. I can't believe it. And Jesus is like, man, you guys are crazy. Do you think that the Sabbath was made for man, or man for the Sabbath? I mean, come on. You guys are more important than these heads of grain and wheat. You guys are more important to me than anything. The last rule in canon law, this big book of all these church rules, is the salvation of souls is the most important thing. And St. Paul, who was a former Pharisee, said, you know what? All of these laws are trumped by Christ, who loves us and paid the price for these sins. He's freed us from having to obey the law and to live by. We live and strive to do it, but we don't do it because we're scared of hell. We don't do it because we're making people feel bad, or we're doing it because of fear. A true Christian lives the way they live because they love God and want to respond to that loving invitation that He has called us to live a good life that's going to lead us to happiness here and in the next. And so this is the message of religion that we need to make sure that we teach people about, whether they are dealing with anything going on in their lives. They will not find condemnation. They will not find judgment. They will not be felt guilty or ashamed if they come to a Christian. They will feel love. They will feel challenged, but challenged in the sense that I will be there with you to walk you through this. I think that Westboro Baptist Church has done more harm for Christianity than all of Christian Hitchens' book put together and burned in a pot, which would be great too, but no. That is detrimental to our faith, to see that kind of hatred and idiocy, that's not a word, come out of people's mouths and hold those signs up, and it is deadly. So, and that's really big, because there's people hurt, and nobody's perfect. First of all, that's the other thing. That you can tell people all the time, if you find a perfect church, don't join it because it won't be perfect anymore. There is no such thing. I mean, we're made up of sinners, right? I mean, nobody is perfect around. So we've got to recognize the fact that we are not called to judge others. We're called to love others like Christ did. That's exactly what He did in His life. And I think we could do a lot better with this message in our evangelization of a culture who sometimes doesn't want to hear it because they don't want to hear, again, how bad they are. What they do want to hear, and what everyone want to hear, is how good they are, how much potential they have, how awesome they are, how loved they are. That's the message that we need to be proclaiming. The other thing that we need to do, and so that's how I think to reach those three people. The other thing, how do we combat that more bigger problem of liberalism? I think we need to, if truth has been sucked out, we need to inject truth back in. And this is one of the things that Pope John Paul II has written a lot about, is faith and reason. And he has a beautiful image of a document that he called Faith and Reason. He says it's like the two wings of a bird that will help it to soar to heights unimaginable. If we just have the kind of the strict scientific reason, we only can fly so high and in circles. We add on to that the idea of faith and searching for truth that is really truth, and we reach new heights that we're not able to reach just on our own power. That we need to recognize that our faith does not just make our hearts flutter, but it engages our mind and our hearts. That what we're saying makes sense. That what we're saying has been time-tested and true from billions and billions and billions of people that are, many of which are much smarter than I am, and that have spent their lives interpreting Scripture and reading the Greek text and all these things. And infuriates me when somebody will come up to me and say, well, the Old Testament is all about God's anger and wrath, Father Matt, and the gospel contradicts itself in these 3 places here, blah, blah, blah. I said, all right, how many books, what's the first letter of St. Paul's? Who are the 4 gospel writers? Well, I don't know that. Well, you're going to make this judgment about the scriptures, and you don't even know who the 4 gospel writers are. Come on, who fed you this stuff? This is ridiculous things that have been answered, like I said, for thousands of years. And people talk all kinds of weird history things. That again, if you look at the real serious facts about the matter, they don't hold up. So we need to kind of inject reason back into people's minds when it comes to religion, and that this is not just kind of a blind faith leap. And that's a lot of times liberalism will like to say that, is that faith is just a blind jump. You're taking your brain out of your head and you're believing in something even when it doesn't make sense. That's not faith. That is a blind leap, and that's not what we want. We want people to put their brains in their heads and make a rational, reasonable choice to believe because it makes sense. Because it's set up to make Jesus and God has set it up that way to make sure that we as human beings respect our minds and our hearts, and it is very, very real. You can also show history without Christianity in particular, but you could just use this example to show what history looks without religion. We don't have, thank the good Lord, much evidence of this. It's really only in this last century that we have experienced governments who have been atheistic. Governments who have said we will not have religion. And in the process, we have had the bloodiest century that has ever existed in human history. These governments that have outlawed religion and faith, specifically often Christianity, but all the religions, have caused more bloodshed and death than all of the religious wars put together that have ever existed in these other 19 centuries that existed beforehand. And you hear people all the time say, religion causes so much problems. Well, that's not truth if you look at this last century. Religion did cause a lot of problems before, and we're not trying to say that people fought about religion because it meant something to them. It had truth behind it, and it was something that was very important to them. But when you take apart religion, and you take governments that don't believe in religion, or atheistic governments, what you end up with is a horrifying reality that we are still kind of grappling with, things like the Holocaust and Stalin and all those other things that have happened in our own century, in some of the countries in Africa and other places where such evil exists that make it very clear that this is not the right road to go to, and so you can look at just not only reason but experience in our modern history. So how do we also do some more practical things? I think the ecumenical movement is a huge, important thing to combat liberalism. What I mean by this is we have to show that there are real connections between all of different Christians, no matter what their denominations are. And we need to start speaking more and strongly with one voice. Now, there are real differences, and one of the big things we don't want to do with the ecumenical religion, which would fall right into the hands of liberalism, and say, you're as good as me, everybody's fine, we're all the same, and everything is the exact equal. That is not true ecumenical dialogue. But what is true ecumenical dialogue is saying, I celebrate this part of your religion, this all together. This is what makes us Christians. This is what unites us together as one. The love, some of the most fundamental things that we believe are something worthy of celebrating, and could kind of put a shudder in the ideal of liberalism that everybody has their own kind of truths, and it doesn't really, nothing really corresponds together. Nothing, it's all very different. That's not true. And we need to, and as Christians, we need to do a better job of that. We don't want to condemn other Christians. We don't want to kind of call them all, say that they're completely wrong. There's a lot of things that we can work on to bring people together. You see it in the Anglican Church, huge right now. As far as the Anglican and Catholic communion is becoming so strong. I mean, there's a lot of things that are leaning towards people saying that this could really mold into a reunification between those two churches. We've signed concordance with the Lutheran Church that realizes that what they believe and what we believe in, faith and works, is the same thing. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff and movements in that direction. And the same thing with interreligious dialogue. We also have to start recognizing that we need to speak with a voice that is going to help the world to see that religions need to get along, that we need to work together and be able to present a united front and face in that. And in doing so, we can help our brothers and sisters who do not share a Christian faith to grow in their own, and we would help to grow in our own as well. So, and finally, the other thing is we need to talk about faith. We need to make it obvious that what we believe and live it in life so that people can see it. And we need to be non-judgmental and not threatening in any way. But we need to, before we eat a meal at restaurants, we need to make the sign of the cross. We need to say things like, God bless you, and say things like constantly. And it just needs to come naturally out of our mouth. And I don't know about you, but I'm scared to say Merry Christmas to people. I've got a collar on. I mean, it's scary things. And, we need to just kind of say, bite the bullet. You're not offending it. You're not making it. This is what I believe in my heart. And I really think that it's going to be good for you. And you can disagree with me and fight me all you want, but I'm not going to fall into that trap of kind of saying that, well, it's because you don't like it, it's not important to me then really either. It is still important to me. And I want to present it in a way that is with a smile on my face, with nothing but love, nothing threatening here, whatever, just a simple, God bless you. Put a bumper sticker on your car or put something, just make it clear that there are Christians around and that you don't need to be scared of us. We're not bad people. We want to evangelize and announce the gospel in all that we do. And that's I think the ending message there for us. So, good. Any questions or anything anybody has? Yes.
Two things. One with the ecumenical thing. I think that's really, really timely. Obviously, we're both sports fans, but I mean, Tim Tebow and everything. There's nothing that he, says necessarily in his message that lets on that he's, a Baptist or an evangelical Protestant, but it's all just Christian-based, And I think, especially with you talking about how people are so distracted with entertainment, that is a major way, and I think that's exciting.
I would love to write a book about this whole Tim Tebow thing, because you could see it coming out of the pores of culture. They're like, whoa, this guy's invading our turf. I mean, sports is like our thing, and now we got this guy that's obviously religious, and he's a true religious guy, right? There's no doubt about it. He's a real deal. Service, prayer, all those kind of, and yeah, it was so interesting to see people's reactions about that whole thing. So, and
the second thing is a question, and I know it's something I've faced, and maybe something other people are facing in here. Like when we're young and we're trying to get our foot into the professional door, a lot of times we're really, I'm scared, to kind of put what's out there about me, especially with the internet and social media. Like, am I going to take a wrong step? Is a company going to see me and say, this person's emotional, they're spiritual, I don't want to take a chance on them? Do you have any advice in that perspective, or does anybody else, has anyone else experienced that?
Yeah, I would like, let's open that question up, because that's a good one. I have job security, and my boss really likes it when I talk about religion. So I think my only thing, and then I'll open it up, is here's the thing. This is a perfect example of why we need Christians to be Christians and not be scared in the workplace to celebrate all faiths and all religions, or whatever, but to be, say God bless you, and to make it known, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm not going to persecute, I'm not going to discriminate against it, but that's who I am. And that should be one of the first things that we should be able to know about someone. So we need good Christian businessmen to close Chick-fil-A on Sundays. I think that's a really cool thing, and to kind of make it clear that, I respect your religious beliefs, and they're not because they're true and they're real. And so my advice is to, I would say you're gonna find that person. You don't want to, and maybe other people have experience with this too. And I think this is a really important question we should open up. But I just know that sometimes if you hide who you are, it can make not only your experience at work, but also just your own kind of personal experience so much. You feel like you kind of are not true to who you are, and that's probably the most, one of the most important things. And that I often do believe and know that God rewards those who are saying, you know what, this is who I am. I'm gonna wear it on my sleeve. It's a big part of my life, and if I lose a job for that, I'll sue you for $1 million and I'll be able to build a church. No, if I lose my job for that, then I will find someplace else that will respect and honor who I am. But can anyone speak to that?
Well, I can't speak to it as far as like bosses, but I know at my work I've been scared to talk about like, oh, I'm going to theology on tap tonight, just with I'm a teacher. So with the other teachers, like I've had it, where I was going to a Bible study and I'd always be like, oh, I'm going to this thing tonight. And then one day I was just like, oh, I'm going to a Bible study. And all the girls on my team were like, cool. And one of the other girls was like, oh, I go to a small group also. I think there's a lot of times we have a fear that people aren't going to accept us for who we are, but they don't care. Like, they don't care that we're Christian. It doesn't bother people that you're Christian. I think a lot of us people are scared of faith, or I guess like our perception of how that fear might be is not where they are. And like even I go to St. Paul's, and I have a lot of my students that go to St. Paul's, and I've had parents come up to me like at church or at my school say how they love that they get to see me there. And the kids come up to me and they get really excited to see a teacher that's their teacher at church, which I think one of the things is because they think I sleep at school. But like, they don't realize that I exist outside of it. But I think that when you put yourself out there, I think that there's a lot more acceptance for what we're saying and for what we're doing and for what we believe than I think we realize. And I think there is more respect for our faith even than we know.
Kind of piggyback off what Rachel was saying, but also I think there's a lot more common interests than we realize. So like it'll bring up a conversation like, oh, I feel this way too. Like, it's so cool that you think this. Like, maybe we can go to church together, but not really. But and then also like if they have a question about something, like even if they are a little angered or hurt about something, they might then be like, okay, well this person might know a little bit about this. I can go to them with my questions.